Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 317, An Introvert's Guide to Change. There's a well-worn saying which is that the only constant in life is change, and how true that is. In the last episode, I focused on how the uncertainty that inevitably accompanies change has the potential to shake our capability. This led me to both recognise and appreciate that we need to access different capabilities in times of change if we're to navigate them successfully. Equipping ourselves to deal with the many roadblocks that change puts in our way, developing our resilience, not so we bounce back unchanged, but so we learn as we encounter the challenges, and knowing how to construct effective contingency plans, our plan Bs, makes perfect sense to me. So, this episode is devoted to sharing a few things from my practical guide to change, especially with we introverts in mind. What I share here, I have learned through my experience working as a change agent with my corporate clients and navigating my own messy paths through change. They are questions that have carried me through in some cases, saved my arse in others, and yet more I learned only by omission on reflection. I'm sharing detail around just 3 that are really relevant to the process of change, and one that is important so that you know you're not on your own in the process. One thing for sure, I keep these questions with me at all times because I never know when I'm going to need them again. I will, of course, touch again on uncertainty because it goes hand in hand with change, meaning you cannot have one without the other. So the question for this episode is not how to avoid change and the accompanying uncertainty, but how to dance with it, even though you don't much like the tune and you may be stuck with a clumsy 2 left feet kind of partner. Because here's the thing. It's important that you don't abandon yourself during times of change, as you'll invariably experience subtle or not so subtle pressure to be more visible, more vocal, more on your toes or fleet of foot. So this is about how to stay grounded, purposeful and aligned whilst everything else is shifting aimlessly. The place I want to start is understanding the driver of the change, which is revealed by a simple enough question. Is this change being done to me or by me? If the driver is internal, meaning you've initiated it, so it's being done by you, you're most likely to have a fair degree of autonomy and/or personal agency. Changes like this typically involve shifting your career, making significant life changes, or embarking on personal growth. Whilst it'd be great to think that changes like this don't destabilise your capability quite so much, I have known people to avoid making the change they wanted or needed to because they lacked the courage and self-belief. This done-by-me change is largely a very different beast from a change that is imposed on you by an external factor or force, so being done to you. Examples here include an organisational restructure, new leadership, or changing market pressures. Please don't fall into the trap, though, that this will mean that you have no control or influence, because tough as it sounds, as Viktor Frankl noted, you can always control how you respond to external events. Whilst most of the questions I share will be useful for both types of change, you'll always need to be clear about your starting point and your desired endpoint, your ideal outcome. So the question may be simple enough, but being really honest with ourselves is not always so simple. And both types of change may impact your identity, which is also something to be dealt with. Deciding who you'll be once the change transition is complete is not to be left to chance, regardless of the type of change. For this episode, though, I'll focus on the externally imposed change because many of my clients find that naturally more difficult to deal with. I say many because an almost equal number will find the change they know they need to make just as difficult as I mentioned earlier. On the surface, that may seem a little strange until we realise that a shift in identity may be involved in both. Due to the lack of autonomy and reduced personal agency, imposed change can be too fast for our liking, meaning we have to make decisions and make moves even though we don't have all of the information. And change like this typically exists inside a trust recession. You know that others know more than you, but you don't know who, so you're not sure who to trust anymore. What can make this difficult is our preference to keep our head down and hope our work speaks for itself, when in reality, this is the very time we need to be more visible and willing to showcase our talents. And that is something many introverts still struggle with. So the next question is, how do I demonstrate my value authentically? It will almost certainly require you to stretch your comfort zone, and you can do that on your own terms so you're not out there in the world of fear and anxiety. And being authentic does not remove the need to be visible. It simply changes how you choose to be seen. And that choice matters because visibility with the wrong intention becomes performance. So instead of asking, how do I show up more? It may be more useful to ask, what do I want to be known for in this period of transition? That shifts you from reacting to the noise to shaping your presence with purpose. Because it's important that you're not overlooked in any reshuffle, start by owning your skills and knowing how they add value. They are the things that have helped you achieve success thus far and may well help you in the future. But also be mindful of the essence of Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. We cannot rest on our laurels, so whilst we may have remarkable technical skills, we also need to balance that with our interpersonal and people skills. These are the kind of roadblocks that can send us heading for the hills and wanting to leave everyone else to it. But I need to ask you this. How will that serve you and satisfy your need for fulfillment? How will that elevate your standing in your company? How will you get to your next promotion if you do that? Roadblocks, obstacles, and rabbit holes are rarely the impossible barriers that we treat them as. And as introverts, we typically have the temperament to deconstruct them and see them for what they are. Temporary inconveniences most of the time that our psyche latches onto with glee, hoping that we'll retreat to safe ground. The reality is we may need to quit the catastrophizing and get real. What helps here is to pause and then step back to get a clearer view, because it's true that stepping back often feels like relief in the moment, but we need to be careful that it doesn't quietly compound what frustrates us about change. So this is not about withdrawing with a view to avoid, but about being willing to act in alignment with what matters. And there's something that very much goes hand in hand with that, which is being able to answer the third question. What are my non-negotiables? These are the conditions, often informed by your values, that you're not prepared to sacrifice during any change or transition. It's all too easy to get swept along with the change out of fear. Fear of missing out, fear of being perceived as a loser, fear of being unemployed even. On reflection, how often would we have been better off saying, "Here's where we part company"? I can certainly think of a few times when that would have been a better option for me had I not been so chicken. But I know better than to have regrets, so I make a point of learning from those times, as there is always gold to be mined, even from the most hostile or barren of landscapes. Knowing our non-negotiables enables us to have our plan Bs in place right from the start. Too many people leave crafting these mitigating strategies and contingent actions until we need them. Rookie mistake. When we need them, we're likely to be stressed and less able to think clearly. So have them ready ahead of time so when you need to action them, there's no thinking required. And please don't make the mistake of only preparing one plan B. You'll need a plan B for every roadblock you can anticipate. From a project management perspective, this is essential work which will enable you to plan your energy expenditure and minimize any negative impact. So those are the 3 questions that it's so useful to ask yourself during the process of change. And now for my question about who is there for you. From bitter experience, it's far easier to craft your plan Bs with a trusted network that you have built intentionally. So this question is, who is there for you as both a sounding board and an honest ally? I know there's a fallacy that introverts don't need anyone, that we're better on our own. But the reality is the human race is a social race, and we all need some good people around us. I stress good in that we need people who won't collude with our fears, but also won't shame us with toxic positivity. We need these people in a reciprocal way to think things through with, to test ideas with, and to offload pressure to when necessary. And being introverts, we don't need an army of people, just a band of kind souls who understand us and love us enough to be honest with us. So I've shared a few of my most utilised questions during change. Is this change being done to me or by me? And that question is so important because the strategies and plans you put in place are dependent on the answer. The next question was, how do I demonstrate my value authentically? That will probably involve more visibility, but it's not about faking. And finally, what are my non-negotiables? What are those things that I'm not prepared to compromise? And then there's that specific question that gets you to focus on you and your support system. Who is there for me as a sounding board and an honest ally? It's far easier to manage the transition through change when we have the right people around us. And remember not to overlook or ignore one of the other important questions, even though we've not unpacked it here. What really is my desired outcome? That last question is one that deserves consideration throughout the change process as more information becomes available and you're in a better position to make informed choices. I consider it very wise to be able to refine your desired outcome in light of new information. I can't leave this topic without sharing some key points from an article published recently called "The Leadership Skill That Matters Most in an Age of Constant Change." I'm delighted to say that the essence of this article plays straight into our hands as introverts, because one of the key findings is that the leaders who are at advantage are those who cultivate inner stillness, create space between events and reactions, leading to clearer thinking, better judgment, and less reactive decision-making. Who does that sound like? It goes on to say that in this age of AI, which will undoubtedly surpass us in terms of speed and volume of information, the edge that we bring, which cannot be surpassed, comes from, and I quote, awareness, compassion, ethical judgment, and creativity born from silence. I propose then, my introverted friends, that we are well placed to deal with this era of constant change once we are able to own our strengths. Now, in conclusion, I trust you'll come to find my questions as useful as I have. And of course, they are just a smattering of the ones you'll need to ask. And it needs to be said that knowing these questions is not the same as using them intentionally. Most people can articulate these questions in hindsight. Far fewer of us can hold on to them in the moment when uncertainty is loud and time feels compressed. So the real work is not in understanding the questions. It is in recognizing when you are in danger of abandoning those questions and yourself. If we accept that change always brings uncertainty, which it does, then the question is not how to avoid change so we can eliminate the uncertainty, but how to prepare ourselves quietly to dance with it even when we are not in charge of the music being played or at liberty to choose our dance partners. Because we can always control how we dance in each moment, because our rhythm is ours to follow. I think the real mark of the professional and leader I'd choose to follow is this. When the path becomes less clear, how prepared are we to continue? And how competently and collaboratively do we lead ourselves and others? If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.